Hey now everybody, I want to talk to you about my favorite farm tool, the garden hoe. Yes, the garden hoe. Now, I bet I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that's not very exciting. Probably it's not exciting because you're thinking of this. When about this time of year you get the garden going and you're ready to start hoeing some weeds out of there, and you need a hoe and you run to the hardware store, and this is sometimes the only thing you see there, and you buy one of these and you get it home and it's kind of unwieldy. I gotta tell you something, this is not so much a hoe as it is a concrete mixer. Now this is a hoe, and this one, and this one here. These two, they're good too. Here's another good one, and also these. Now, people underestimate the garden hoe probably because they're using this when they should be using something like this. But first, the hoe is an implement of cultivation. Now I got to explain what I mean by cultivation, because there's the broad sense of the term and then there's the more defined term. In a broad sense, cultivation just means growing something, developing something, and in farming it's cultivating a crop. You're growing a crop. For instance, plowing, soil preparation, planting, and then weeding, which we call the narrow definition of cultivation, and then later the harvest. But in the more defined and narrow definition of cultivation, it's basically to eliminate weeds, the elimination of weeds. And I guess I got to define weeds too, don't I? Weeds are any plant that is not your cultivated plant you're trying to grow. It's anything growing in the row that you don't want there, that you didn't plant there, and it's not helping you to be there. And so cultivation in that narrow sense is the elimination of plants you don't want growing along with your crop plant. Another part of that narrow definition of cultivation, aside from the elimination of weeds, is the bedding up of the plant. And you can kind of think of it like this. You're basically you're stirring the dirt, and then you're pulling the dirt up to the plant. You're basically mulching the plant with dirt from around the plant. That's also the narrow definition of cultivation. Elimination of weeds and bedding up the plant. Tucking it in bed, telling it good night, bedding it up. Putting the covers over it with a little bit of dirt mulch. Nowadays, commercially, the cultivation, the weeding is done with herbicides, poisons that kill the plant that you don't want growing near the plant crop. In the old days, before they had developed any poisons like that, the only way to go in and eliminate those weeds would be by hand, basically. And some implements, some horse-drawn implements. We'll talk about that some other time. But basically, down the rows or the furrows where you walk between the rows, most of the time in a large field setting, that would have been cultivated by a larger mechanical machine, a walking cultivator or just a simple stock plow, like what you see on the old movies. But then you've got the weeds in the actual row where the plants are, in between each plant, and you can't run a mechanical device down the row where the plants are, or you'll end up destroying your crop plant as well. So how do you get the weeds out from between each plant in a row? The hoe. Yeah, it had to be done by hand. Back then, if you're working a big field, even an acre, that's a lot of work. If you're hoeing it by hand, and you need the right tool to be able to do that, or you're going to wear yourself out, and you need to be doing it correctly, or you'll wear your back out and you'll get tired way sooner. It's already a laborious task, but you'll get tired a whole lot sooner if you're using the wrong tools. Now, as I said, if you had a small garden plot, it would be fairly simple to pull up the weeds by hand. I mean, there you are, just bend over, reach down, pull them up. It could be done in a matter of minutes, depending on how small your little patch is, or raised bed or whatever. You might even use a little trowel, something like that, to stir around and bed up while at the same time you're killing the weeds and whacking them off there at the roots. But it's really not practical if you have a larger garden space, or if you have a field that you're trying to cultivate and get the weeds out of. And also, you know, you don't want to bend over a whole half-acre garden or whatever. So then the hoe would become a very practical implement. Otherwise, you'd be bending over and you'd break your back and ruin your knees and quit farming altogether, which that wouldn't be good. But with a really stout hoe that has a really solid and a good handle, you can do all your weeding standing straight up and use the handle and not really put your back out. You say, well, there's a tendency to, when you're weeding, you want to get down close to it so you have more control. And you do have more control if you're closer to the business end of it. But really, in the long run, if you're doing a big garden, you need to train yourself. And this was hard for me growing up. My mama would say, don't bend over, you're going to wear your back out, when we were in the garden hoeing a row of whatever. And so you need to practice standing up and using the hoe handle and gaining that control. With a little practice, it'll begin to feel natural for you. The tendency, again, is to bend over, especially if you're using one of these to try to eliminate weeds, because it's so awkward, it's unwieldy, and the weight is wrong. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And so the tendency is to get down there and you know, really chop, because it just doesn't work well. You need a good hoe, because you've got to be quite surgical when it comes to eliminating weeds, because you know, by the time your plant starts growing, it might be tiny. I mean, you're way up here, you're 5-6 foot away from the plant, and there's a little weed growing, you know, 1 inch away, and you, with precision, from a distance of 5 or 6 feet away, are looking at that and trying to eliminate only that weed and not your plant. It takes practice, and you may end up killing some of your plants, but that's okay, because you're training yourself. In the long run, it'll be better on you and your back when you learn to be precise like that. And even left-handed, I mean, there are times where your back will still get a little tired and you want to switch. Well, go ahead and work with switching. Like I'm right-handed, and so it's very comfortable for me to hold a hoe like this. But go ahead and switch and do some hoeing with your left hand for a while. You don't have to go as fast, but it's good practice for you to be ambidextrous with your hoeing. Being able to stand up and hoe right-handed or left-handed without bending over. Plus it'll impress your friends, or maybe not. As some of you are aware of, my mama's daddy was a sharecropper. His name was John Wesley Daniel. When he was working the kids out in the field, my mother was the youngest, and he would tell them, he'd catch them bending over, and they were trying to, you know, that's that temptation to bend over and do your hoeing. And he would say, no, y'all stand straight up. He goes, use that hoe handle. I paid for the whole thing, so use the hoe handle. And so they would practice standing straight up to hoe. Now, the strength and the weight of the handle is what makes this a good hoe or a bad hoe, and what gives it precision so that you can be surgical. It doesn't need to be too springy. Oftentimes, these hoes here are just too springy, and they're way too lightweight. Often this looks like, it could be ash, but it looks like some kind of softwood. You really need a harder wood for a handle. Ash, I suppose, is a good one without being overly heavy. Believe it or not, the heavier the handle, the better, within reason. I mean, you don't want it made out of metal or pipe or a concrete or anything. You don't want to overdo it. But here's one of the things I have found out, is that if you will find the halfway point for the weight of the handle, that point at which it rests level on one finger and mark that point. If you'll measure from that point to the short end or to the business end, take that measurement and divide that measurement by the entire length of the hoe, and you'll come up with a percentage of this. And it really, I've found that my favorite hoes are at least 33%. That half what that weight mark, the equilibrium there, is at about 33% or higher, makes for a better hoe. That, coupled with the fact that your handle is stout and it doesn't move, it doesn't have a lot of springiness, and it is somewhat heavy. I mean, you can just, I wish you were here. I wish you were here. I wish you could pick up these and just feel the difference, and you would know. Another thing that many people don't realize is that your hoe needs to be sharp. It needs to have a bevel on it and some amount of sharpness. Now, not enough to, like, shave or anything, but you do need to put a bevel just on the top side, and you can do that with a file. Imagine this. Imagine I took my good pocket knife and I went out in the soil, and when it got crusty, it's got some weeds growing on it, you take your good pocket knife, your sharp one, and it's so easy to dig down into the dirt with that pocket knife and destroy those little plants. And it feels good doing it for some reason. I don't know. It's not really good for the pocket knife, but it's great for weeding. So imagine that if your hoe is sharp, you can do that same precision weeding from standing up, and that's what you want, a sharp hoe. And to get one sharp, you can just take a regular old file, and you got to hold it really steady. It's really best to put it in a vise, but you want to get that bevel. You want to maintain that, find that one angle you want, and maintain that angle, and shine it up. Shine it up to where it's, again, you're not going to cut hair with it or shave or cut up meat with it, but you want it sharp enough that it can slice into the ground. And don't forget your edges too. Putting a bevel on these edges. But again, the best way to sharpen is to put it in a vise and down lower, as low as you can get it. The handle is kind of awkward, it's in the way, but put it in the vise as low as you can get it down, so that it doesn't chatter a lot and move on you when you're trying to sharpen it, and get it pretty tight, and then you can get a real good angle on it, and just file away till you're happy. You and your hoe are happy. You can put it in a vise and use an electric, hand grinder with a grinding wheel attached to it. Just go slow. You got to be careful with when you're sharpening anything or putting an edge on anything with an electric grinder. The RPMs are so fast it can overheat on you and begin turning the. If you get the metal too hot, it'll start turning blue, and you'll be dealing, messing with the temper and all that. So just try not to overdo it if you're using an electric grinder, and keep that same angle. Don't be changing your angle around. Another thing you can do to get a lot more precision with your hoeing is to change or adjust the angle of the hoe head or the blade here. I don't know if you can tell here, I don't know if you can notice, but this right hand side, well, your left, my right, is slightly down just a little bit. And obviously, there's an angle here on your hoe. So really we're talking about two basic angles that you can change. I'm right-handed, and so I like to have this right-hand side, as I'm looking at the hoe, a little bit closer to me. It's almost like a grater blade. Grater blades aren't just flat and straight on, perpendicular to the direction they're going. They're at an angle and, kind of like that. And so, and really all this is subtle. This is very subtle. We're not talking about a lot, but just a little bit of an angle on it, because all this is changeable. That's what I'm trying to say. When you find a hoe that you like, it's good weight and all, and you take it out, then you start to use it, and you begin adjusting these angles a little bit to fit you, to fit your height. And because height matters, if you're If you're a short person, the angle of your hoe is going to be more like this. If you're a tall person, it's going to change. And so this angle here needs to change to accommodate your own height. And really it's trial and error. Give it a try, take it out for a spin, do a little bit of hoeing and move these around until you get that right angle. You can, to adjust it, you could, possibly even put it in a vise, find your right angle there, and then just kind of bend it. You don't want to, it needs to be a solid vise. You don't want to break it or break the hoe, but just put a little bit of pressure on it, get it bent a little bit, and then you can, put it to change this angle. You can put it in the vise and just very gently just kind of bend it. Again, be gentle, be easy, go easy. You don't want to break it. But then you'll find that just right angle, because basically what you're doing when you're hoeing is you're not so much digging and chopping straight down on ground. You're shearing the top crust of the dirt. You're just shearing it. I wish you could. You're coming in at that angle. For me, would be the right hand side, and you're just kind of zip, and you're shearing just that top little bit of dirt, getting it crusty. And then you finish it, that's killing the weeds, and then you finish up by hilling up the plant and drawing that dirt towards you. So it's very subtle things, and you end up, you buy yourself a good hoe that you like, that's solid, and you make these adjustments, and you find that magical, sweet spot where you get it all adjusted and it's just right, and that becomes your hoe. Nobody else in the world can use your hoe. I'm kidding. You can let people borrow it, but it's custom fit to you, and that is a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing. Your hoe. Your hoe. All right. So now, when to hoe? Generally speaking, you'll want to hoe and cultivate. Remember, we're killing weeds. That's the narrow definition of cultivation. You want to kill those weeds and go in and hoe your plants about 2 to 3 days after a rain. That gives it, pretty much for our area, after 2 or 3 days you can walk it, without bogging down and making Bigfoot tracks in your garden, getting it all muddy. 2 or 3 days after that rain, you can go out, and that's about the time the sun has had time to hit it after that rain. And the ground that has been rained on forms a crust. You've probably seen this. When you first till and plant, it's beautiful, fluffy dirt. It's just dark and beautiful, and then it rains on it, and then it kind of evens out, and then there's a smooth crust on top of that ground. After 2 or 3 days of the sun shining on it again, it gets kind of brittle on top. That's about the time you want to go out and hoe your plants. Because remember, you're doing two things. You're eliminating the weeds, you're setting them back, because they'll germinate right after a rain, and so you're breaking up, destroying their ability to get a foothold and start growing. But then at the same time, you're drawing that dirt back up to the plant, and you're mulching the plant with dirt, basically. And imagine if you got all wet, you're out in the rain, and then you put on a raincoat, or then you put on a coat of any kind, or more clothes. You're going to stay wetter longer, because that doesn't have a chance. You don't have a chance to dry out. And so that's kind of what you're doing with the mulching, with the dirt, because you are preserving, you're keeping and holding, retaining that moisture where it's needed, where the plant is. Because when a ground gets crusty after that rain, it doesn't seem like it would be this way, but when a ground gets crusty, moisture can leave it, can wick out of it and into the atmosphere, better when it's crusty. So that's why you want to go in, do your cultivation, your weeding, and then draw it up and mulch that little plant. Then when you get through, doing your cultivating, sometimes there's a little bit of dirt caked up on your hoe. You want to knock that off. Sometimes I dig a hole out here, and I'll put some pea gravel in it or something. And if I've just used a shovel and it's got dirt on it, I don't want that to sit on the shovel and cause it to rust. So I'll just run the tip of that shovel in that gravel and knock all that dirt off. You can do the same thing with a hoe. Get the dirt off, and then when you put it up until the next 2 or 3 days after a rain, You get you an oily rag, keep you an oily rag near the hoe, whatever, and just wipe that dust and that dirt off and get a little thin film of oil on that hoe and then put it up. I hang my hoes up so I can grab them and go. They're hanging on the wall over here, and my favorite hanger is, hoes are awkward shapes. So it's hard to hang them with a nail because, you can't quite. So I like using, forked branches that I find out in the woods that are perfect for that. You can hang them up and the hoe just goes right on those. Those are real handy to hang a hoe up on. Generally speaking, wintertime is a good time for me when I don't have a lot going on. Maybe even, late summer, right before harvest, right before fall, is a good time for tool maintenance where you can come in and oil all your metal parts. And then I use boiled linseed oil for these handles and keep them somewhat oiled up. It preserves them, makes them look really, really good. You want everybody bragging on, man, your hoe looks really, really good. And if you happen to buy a hoe that's got kind of a weathered handle, maybe somebody had it hanging on the outside of a barn and the weather has taken its toll on the handle and kind of dry looking, kind of like this one needs another good oiling. And when you first get one like that, you can kind of overdo the oil and put a real thick, generous coating of linseed oil on it. Let it soak in good, and then a day or two later, you might want to do it again. Get that oil soaked in. It'll preserve your handle, make it go a long way. Now, believe it or not, I have so much more I want to say about the garden hoe, but we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to save it for next time. I'm Paul Mack, and I'll talk to you real soon about my favorite tool, the garden hoe. See ya. And he would say, no, y'all stand straight up. He goes, use that hoe handle. I paid for the whole thing, so use the hoe handle. And so they would practice standing straight up to hoe. By the way, speaking of my mother and her growing up the daughter of a sharecropper, I'm not trying to hawk this book. I'm not trying to play the salesman. But you can read about her growing up years in her autobiography, A Sharecropper's Daughter, Born and Raised in Nevada County, Arkansas, by Lenore Daniel McWilliams. Believe me, this is a great, great read. It's available on Amazon, or you can go to the Farmhands Companion website, www.farmhandscompanion.com, and go to the FHC General Store page. Scroll down and you can find it there for sale. Follow the links. Truly, truly, it is a great book, a must-read for all school-age children, homeschool, public school, whatever. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and it'll make you think. It covers one of the most devastating epochs in our national American history, the Great Depression. So order your copy today. Again, you won't regret it. Go to Farmhands Companion, www.farmhandscompanion.com, go to the FHC General Store page, scroll down until you find the book, and follow the link. You'll be glad you did. Really, it's a good book. Now remember, I'm not trying to hawk this book, but I really do think you'll enjoy it. So, now back to the hoe. Hey, I want to thank you so much for watching my favorite farm tool. If you've got a little bit of time, please subscribe if you haven't already, because I've got a lot more farm tools. I'm not going to run out anytime soon. And also, if you care to support the show on Patreon, just go to patreon.com and look for Farmhands Companion. One more thing, if possible, share these little video offerings with your family, your friends, or whoever has an interest in anything farmical. I'd really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you again soon.